10 or 20 years of age and could be identified that early, we might be disadvantaging ourselves. But anyway, at the moment, just to make the point that it could be that it's not so much cognitive reserve as it's, you look at the other end of the distribution, it may be sort of not developing as much as you could have because you've got the risk. So again, just does mental activity cause preserved mental ability, or does preserved mental ability support ongoing mental activity? Having spent a lot of time in my life assessing and talking with people who have dementia or on the way to getting dementia and so forth, it is really clear that as you get cognitive impairment, you pull back from things that challenge you too much, and you simplify your life in order to make your life go better and easier, so that not everybody understands this. But it's not the only reason why people withdraw, but clearly some people, as they start to feel overwhelmed by things that they used to be able to do well, start avoiding those kind of activity. And this can include, obviously includes things like playing bridge and playing chess and maybe retiring from mentally demanding jobs. I think for a lot of people it also, at certain stages, can also include withdrawing from particularly like group social interactions, because some group interactions can be fairly cognitively demanding in a way, and become kind of confusing for people. So it may be much easier to deal with people one-on-one. And as I was just talking about, how early in life is dementia detectable, it's kind of cognitive reserve versus early effects kind of argument.
Does that mean the cognitive reserve, that goes back to this reserve you're talking about that may exist, and therefore you might be getting dementia, but your reserve is staving off the impact of it for a while? Is that what that means?
Let's come back to this when we have the diagram on it, because it's actually easier to answer that. But can you read this?
That first? Yep. Oh, yeah. Okay, that's the point.
It doesn't matter
yeah.
what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is
I use this for a couple of reasons. This is a real simplistic example in some ways of the underlying process in the expertise kind of argument. Because one of the reasons that you can do this is that we're all really expert at reading. And so you're no longer going letter by letter and figuring out how the word sounds and how it's spelled and stuff. That actually most people reading are making judgments based on the length of the word and the first and last letter and the form of the word. So now, this works when it works, and then sometimes it can throw you off if you've got words of about the same length, same first and last letters, but it's not the word that you're looking for. You can confuse words that are similar at that level, and then you have to go back and do the more detailed processing. One of the things I notice a lot in the way that I read the newspaper is that I'm scanning newspaper headlines, and most of the time it's like this, probably even like whole phrases at a time for stories that I'm familiar with. And then probably just about every morning, but certainly periodically, there's some, I scan some newspaper headline and it doesn't make sense, and I have to go, well, I saw it didn't make any sense, and I have to go back and actually read the headline. And so it's that kind of process of shifting from this kind of higher order processing to the more detailed kind of processing. Very much like going back a few weeks in the readings, you have the Salthouse paper about the expert typist, where you have the example of expertise keeping up processing speed in that sense. And it turns out what the older expert typists are doing is they're processing whole phrases at a time. They're not going letter by letter, whereas the younger people are matching the speed, but they're doing it more letter by letter. And so you're getting to the same level of performance through different pathways. And so with varying degrees of cognitive processing complexity on the expertise side, this is what the kind of expertise aging argument kind of boils down to. So trait differences in intelligence, do lifelong differences in intelligence results in both higher levels of mental activity and mental ability in later life? One set of questions. So you've got people that are high in cognitive reserve, high in intelligence. You're probably still going to be at least relatively high later in life, no matter what else is going on. And also, you're probably likely to engage in more complex mental activities if you're smarter to begin with.
Is one of those passive and one of those active, like mental ability is passive, it's what you have, and then activity is something that you have to make happen?
Yeah. I mean, you could be really bright and just not do anything with it.
Yeah,
right?
you can be lazy.
Or whatever. You know, at some point in your life, surely you've got somebody who's doing a really mundane job who tells you that they have a tested IQ of like 180 or something.
Does it even go that high? Oh,
Well,
I have no
I
idea.
don't know how good measurement actually is. One of the whole issues that flows out of, when we're talking about intelligence, is because IQ tests were actually designed to identify people and make decisions at the low end of the distribution, it's actually the scoring and the validity is actually worse at the high end of the distribution. So it's actually, it does best what it was designed to do. And so how both the reliability and the sort of predictive validity actually gets worse as you get more than a couple standard deviations on the average. Yeah, and another kind of question is with most of the measures that we use, certainly all the mental status scores. I can't say mental status exam without saying many mental status. I'm saying many mental overlearned behavior. All the mental status, simple mental status exams are really bad with really intelligent, highly educated people. There's actually some of the formulas that have been used to adjust to adjust your score on the Bolstein, for example, for education, means that if you have a PhD, a perfect score means that you're diminished. A little bit of a problem, you know. Well, let's leave it there. So it's actually it gets tricky with really highly educated, highly intelligent people. And then there's the whole intelligence and education thing. Some of the argument about enriched environments and cognitive activity and placing more demands on yourself is kind of centered around the idea that education changes your brain and evolves your brain and makes you smarter, which may at least be part of the story. I'm not saying that doesn't happen at all. But it also tends to be the case that intelligence leads to higher levels of education.
You know, when people say, oh, when you'll get more education, it makes you more intelligent, I'm thinking, no, it just means you know more. That doesn't mean you're smarter. I mean, I'm thinking you might be intelligent and seek, like the second one, more education, but just because you get more education doesn't increases your knowledge, but not your intelligence.
Well, that in itself is, knowledge tests are always part of intelligence tests. They're not the only part.